This is Banshee, and this is Limbo. Two Warframes that rank somewhere on the overall usage chart, which is kind of a shame. Before we had Temple and Octavia, Banshee was the premier sound-controlling Warframe, which was actually a lot cooler than it, sounds. Limbo has the power to tear open his own demiplane that turns everything into Borderlands, but both of them are just not popular. But why is that? Let's take some time and look into two of the poster childs for Warframes that were really cool 10 years ago, but are now just kind of mid. Let's start alphabetically, with Banshee, an absolute veteran of Warframe, being added in the same update as the defense game mode and the undisputed least used Warframe. There's some reasons for this. Banshee is made of tissue paper with the tied lowest armor value in the entire game and very little in the way of abilities to boost her survivability, but it's also her intended niche: stealth and support. Her passive is a blanket silence on all of you and your companion's weapons, which isn't exactly Rhino tier, as there are still some missions you might play where enemies spawn in unalerted to your presence, but most modern content just spawns in enemies who instantly know where you are. But the rest of her abilities are gonna have to wait, because, buddy, the forest is under attack. Deep within the roots of Teleria, where ancient oaths still bind the land, Grand Oak Podrig rises in Raid Shadow Legends. And I'll tell you how you can get him for free using my link in just a moment. This wizened Unk of the Trees is considered to be one of the best legendaries in the entire game. Why is that? He makes your team stronger every turn by accelerating attackers, cleansing harmful statuses, and calling your team to strike as one. So your attackers hit harder, defenders stand taller, and supports become even more impactful. And that's what I find so engaging about Raid. The sheer number of different ways you can use champions and equipment to craft your own unique blend of absolute mayhem. For challenging PvE content like Hydra and high-level dungeons, you want Podrig on your team. And you can get them for yourself by signing up for Raid Shadow Legends today, using my QR code or link in the description, and using promo code WRATH. And if Podrig's not your speed, there are 4 other legendary champions you could redeem instead: Turvold, Alice, Cheshire Cat, or Razelvarg. But you gotta sign up with my link, otherwise the code won't work. And if that wasn't enough, signing up with my link or QR code also gets you the legendary Elenaril from the start, and the epic champion Uugo after reaching level 15. Come find me in game under the name Zachmo, and thanks to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Sonic Boom! Sorry. Sonic Boom is Banshee's first ability, and is a pretty funny conal ragdoll move. Crowd control's usefulness in modern Warframe is meh, but the speed at which it flings people is really amusing. Sonic Fracture is an augment that gives armor stripping properties to Sonic Boom, making it quite worthwhile. Although I think at this point that should just be wrapped up in the main ability. Sonar is the Banshee ability, or at least it is now, considering the incident, but we'll go over that later. This highlights a specific weak spot on enemies that gives a large multiplier to your final damage done to them. This is one of the greatest damage increasing abilities of all time, which is why it's such a shame that it doesn't synergize with actual weak point mods or abilities. It's still decent, however, and the Resonance Augment causes enemies killed with weak spot hits to cast another Resonance centered on them, letting you chain together precision kills. Silence is an aura that deafens nearby enemies. They already can't hear your gunfire because of your passive, but this also stops them from hearing your teammates' guns, enemy death screams, explosions, or anything else that causes their AI to be alerted. It also momentarily stuns enemies who enter the radius, and silences enemies in the RPG sense, stopping them from casting special abilities like grenades. Savage Silence is a silence augment that boosts your finisher damage by an insane amount and also causes enemies stunned by silence to be finishable, but only for that initial 2-second duration, and then they're immune. This probably has a really strong use case in some manner of finisher-centric builds, but if I wanted that, I'd just play Ashe. Soundquake sucks, but that's because folks used to use it to AFK farm back in the day, using the augment Resonating Quake to passively farm defense missions. For this grave sin committed almost 10 years ago, the augment, which originally granted range and damage to the ability, was absolutely gutted, turning your Soundquake into a single pulse that deals increased damage near the epicenter, but that damage is just nothing. Base Soundquake barely fares better, being essentially an AoE channeled permastagger on enemies that deals very little damage and only really serves to ruin your defense teammates' lives by stopping enemies moving to the objective. And that's Banshee, and how she's been for the past 8 years. Wow. Yeah, with a kit left in this condition for that long, it's no wonder barely anybody wants to play her. Which is a shame, because it's a really cool frame idea on paper. Not dealing too much damage directly, but being really good at identifying weaknesses and softening enemies up before rendering them vulnerable to a single lethal strike. It's just a shame that the times have left her behind so badly. Next up in the low tiers is Limbo! Unlike Banshee, Limbo doesn't particularly have any bad abilities, and his gameplay loop is actually pretty powerful and packs good utility. It's just, well, you'll see. Limbo's entire kit revolves around his unique gimmick, the Rift Plane, or Rift if you're chill. You can enter and leave as you like with a dodge roll, and his abilities will put enemies and allies into or out of the rift. Things in the rift can't hurt things outside the rift, and vice versa. With the exception of Warframe abilities, which hit everyone from everywhere. Energy inside the rift regenerates slowly for everyone, and Limbo himself gets 10 energy whenever he kills a rifted enemy. You might be aware that, some people have certain feelings about Limbo. Certain negative feelings. The rift is why. The notion of seeing an enemy in front of you that you cannot kill is enough to drive a Warframe player to madness. Or, more specifically, an elite gamer rage, directed at you. And I mean, nobody's perfect, but if you're playing Limbo, you should take extra measures to make sure if you take an enemy into the rift, you'll also finish them off so as not to provoke your well-adjusted and sociable teammates. Also, tell them backflipping will immediately pop them out of the rift. It probably won't stop them yelling at you, but it covers your bases. Banish is Limbo's bread and butter for moving enemies, mostly enemies, but sometimes allies, into or out of the rift. This is an AoE ability that pushes enemies out of your current plane of existence. Enemies get banished to the rift, and rifted enemies go back to the material plane. Rift Haven is an augment for Banish that causes it to heal allies for a really large percentage of their max health each second, but for reasons listed above, randomly pushing your teammates into the fun dimension, even if it's to save their lives, probably won't be met with the expected gratitude. Stasis. A JoJo's reference would feel kind of played out here, I think. Also, a 6-month wait for Steel Ball Run Episode 2 has me fucked up. This ability lets you freeze time in the rift. That's it. Enemies, projectiles, everything. You get to move and shoot as normal though. This is a godsend for survivability and picking off targets, but you just gotta be careful that the Eximus units and bosses immune to your time stop. Don't pull a Jotaro and shit! That's a JoJo's reference. Rift Surge seems complicated, especially because its use case isn't clearly explained, but in reality, it's a simple tool that lets Limbo pull enemies into the rift without leaving it. Rift Surge, well, surges every nearby rifted enemy in a radius, which doesn't do anything to start, but surged enemies that leave the rift consume the surge and then cast a banish around themselves, pulling them back into the rift along with any other nearby enemies that were outside. Killing a rifted enemy will spread the surge to an enemy outside the rift, which just helps you avoid spamming recasts. Then Rift Surge's augment enters the mix, Rift Torrent. This is, probably without hyperbole, the highest potential damage boosting ability in the game. Guns, melee, even abilities all gain an incredibly strong damage boost per surged enemy, in the rift or otherwise, but only while Limbo himself is in the rift. This incentivizes you to pile as many enemies into the rift as possible before surging them and then exploding them with some absurd damage numbers. But if you go too far and kill everyone in the rift, then you can't use surge to pull another enemy inside, and have to leave the rift and risk instant death. Which is fun, but you're probably seeing the problem here. With everything going on in modern Warframe, trying to pick out one enemy inside a crowd to not kill is really hard. Even more so when your screen looks like this. The Rift looks cool, but it visually distorts your screen on one of the only Warframes who needs to put thought into picking his targets, which isn't helped by how surged enemies look the same whether they're rifted or not. This can lead to you fumbling your entire Rift Surge combo, which I guess is where Limbo's 4 comes in. Cataclysm allows you to just say, fuck it, and send everyone and everything in a huge area to the rift. The area slowly reduces in size before collapsing and spitting everyone back into the material plane, which can be expedited by recasting the ability. In addition to resetting the planar status of everyone nearby, Cataclysm is also good for locking down a single area in defense missions, which seems to be the use case incentivized by Cataclysmic Continuum, which is a mouthful. The augment causes kills within the bubble to extend its duration, but not increase its size, so eventually it'll sit at its minimum size, roughly 1/3 that of the original bubble. I have so many thoughts about Limbo. He has one of the most complicated ability setups in the entire game, requiring a good deal of thinking to get on top of how it works and the different routes you can use, and also one of the highest skill caps in the entire game, in exchange for a relatively modest and non-flashy playstyle. If played optimally, Limbo is able to weave through enemies in the rift, grabbing vulnerable enemies and using them to drag the rest of their comrades into the rift, massively increasing his damage, all while he himself barely ever gets hurt. But he doesn't. That doesn't happen in a mission, and that's because it's really hard to parse information as Limbo. In the modern age of Warframe, where every modern frame comes with a bunch of helpful little markers to signify which abilities are affecting which enemy at which time, Limbo, the frame who probably needs those indicators the most, just doesn't get them. Also, his screen is doused in Vaseline. It feels like trying to do one of those stupid duck, farmer, fox boat puzzles while in the middle of an MMA cage match. There might also be some other pain points that the 6 Limbo gods can tell me his kit also needs if he's to be brought to modern standards, but I just cannot get good at this character when the information pertaining to his gameplay is communicated to me so poorly. And I guess that's kind of the thing with Limbo and Banshee too, right? Both of them were designed with the Warframe of 10 plus years ago in mind. Sure, they show their age differently. Banshee's abilities are outdated and can't keep up with modern gameplay, while Limbo's design is unable to communicate clearly the information you need while surrounded by hundreds of mobs. But either way, they've both been left in the dust as the entire scope of the game has shifted around them, and they stayed put. So like, reworks, right? That's obvious. Send Limbo and Banshee to Rework City. These are 2 frames with really strong identities and some really powerful abilities that allow them to inhabit their own gameplay niche. They just need some fixes and changes to help them on their way. As to what those fixes entail, well, as a guy who knows nothing about professional game design and balance, I have a couple ideas. Banshee is really good at using sonar to do big damage, but the fact that her weak spots don't count as headshots is just silly at this point. In order to do big single hit damage in the current sandbox, you need a weak point build, which just doesn't function with sonar, meaning you have to create this weird single shot damage build that doesn't use headshots, and it doesn't work. Also, Soundquake needs something done with it. Whether or not that fix means getting it removed entirely, adding back the old resonating Quake mod, I don't know. I just feel like Big Blast of Sound has a ton of potential as an ability and should be represented as something that is actually, you know, functional. Limbo mainly just needs some more visual signifiers. Being able to pick apart rifted enemies, surged enemies, and rifted enemies who are surged at a quick glance would already go so far towards making Limbo more enjoyable to play. As for the Rift's look itself, I really like it. The fact that it is messy and kind of disorienting makes sense as it's this chaotic demiplane. But I think in order for that cool disorientation effect to not be a horrific impairment, you need some bright, easily identifiable markers on enemies that allow you to look at a big room and quickly come up with a game plan. Overall though, these are fun frames to play. Even with their flaws, you can see the clear identity and fantasy these frames are designed to fit into. They just need some help. And there you go, my thoughts on 2 of the least popular Warframes in game today. My hope is to do more of these in the future, either on other niche Warframes or just older, less popular ones. The plan for now is to let my channel members vote on the next frames that'll appear in these videos. So if you want, you could totally sway my production pipeline into making propaganda for your Warframe main for as little as $1 a month. Alright, that's all I got. See you later! Thanks again to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Remember to sign up using my link to start your journey with 2 free legendary champions and an epic. This video was made possible thanks to my supporters, and a special thank you to my Zeta supporter, Lunalaris Sun.